In progress. Okay. All right. Welcome. And I hear an echo. So
wow, what's that about?
Got to maybe mute. All right. I think it went away. Wonderful. Welcome again. This webinar is called Hosting Regeneration in Canada. And I'm thrilled with all of you who have joined. Those of you who I know already bring so much wisdom, and those I don't, I'm sure have much to share as well. I hope it will be a conversation when we can learn together. Our focus is on Canada, and yet there is value in what we'll share and what we'll explore for anyone anywhere in the world. So you all from parts outside of Canada are very welcome, and it's wonderful to have your views and your questions as well. We wanted to start by acknowledging that focus on the Canadian context. I'm joining you from Montreal in Quebec in Canada. This is land that is traditionally stewarded and today stewarded by the Haudenosaunee people. And I want to acknowledge what Destination Canada so beautifully calls this land as a place of natural majesty and a mosaic of human possibility. And in all of that majesty and possibility, there's also a very complex context of relations between settlers and Indigenous people and between people of all varieties. And our hope is that this conversation, this gathering, and this learning that we're embarking on together may contribute to peace and healing and regeneration going forward. So this is some of the context that we come together around, and Bill has a beautiful invitation into shared intention as well. But you're muted, Bill.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. And nice to see you all. This is a blessing that was shared with me on a project we're working in Brazil. It's first read by a Sufi elder, Jelani, at the Sacred Arts Camp in 2019. And so in this time of conflict and destabilization and turmoil, distrust, let's take this moment, to consider why we are here. Let's remember our love for this beautiful planet that feeds, nourishes, and sustains us. Let's remember our love for the whole of humanity in all corners of the world. Let's recollect our sincere desire to protect all this for ourselves, for all living beings, and for generations to come. As we act today, may we find the courage to bring a sense of peace, love, and appreciation to everyone we encounter, to every word we speak, and to every action we make. Together, rooted in love, we are all we need. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you, Bill. Beautiful. So we want to give an overview of the flow that we have in mind, but I actually want to call out one person who is just joining briefly. And Anna has shared, Anna Pollock is here and wanted to just offer a message of support for our journey, but was struggling with her sound. Anna, are you here? She sent me a private message saying that she's struggling.
Michelle?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, good. Okay. All signs are showing I'm not. Hi, Bill. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Anna. Nice to hear.
Thank you for letting me interrupt the beginning of your presentation. I just wanted to give you my full support and tell any Canadians listening to you that if you are starting your regenerative journey, you couldn't have two of the finest teachers. They're both my mentors. I've learned so much from each of you. I'm sorry I can't be in today's session. I'm at a Hospitality Alliance meeting in London, trying to move them towards regeneration. So forgive me and all the best.
Thank you, Anna. Well, and it's reciprocated for sure.
Mm-hmm.
You're one of our teachers.
That means so much. Thank you. That was a really delightful surprise. And some of you will know of Anna Pollock's work. And if you don't, you absolutely should find her on LinkedIn and follow her. She's in my opinion, the leading visionary in this shift towards regenerative approaches to tourism.
Yep, absolutely.
Mhm.
Thanks. And go for it, guys. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Anna.
Good luck. Okay. So I will share my screen and offer a quick overview of what we have in mind for these 2 hours. And in fact, let me pause 1 second. As I say the words 2 hours, I realize 2 hours is a lot, and it might feel good to take a deep breath. Maybe stretch. And if you want to turn off your camera, just not to feel self-conscious, it also helps us learn better if we can be in our bodies and be relaxed. So whatever it takes for you to feel present and comfortable and relaxed, I invite that. Okay, and we will try to remember to do that again at the hour point, an hour in, and take care of yourself. If you need a break, then do it. But we don't have an official break planned, just that sort of stretch break. All right, so here's what we have in mind. A mix of theory, story, especially conversation and practices. And I'm underlining this partly for me and Bill, because we like to talk about this stuff, but our intention is to say as little as possible, just enough to seed some conversation. We'll see if we succeed, but
Well, hopefully, and Michelle, let me just interrupt. Hopefully people have actually taken a chance to read the document.
Right.
It will help inform the conversation.
To those I was able to send an email to. I promised there wouldn't be a test, but there is a sincere invitation to interrupt and bring questions, and the chat is a good place to do that if you don't feel confident to just speak out, but you are welcome at any time to speak out. So this is partly to us to say we would really like to invite conversation, but it also just makes sense for the focus to be on conversation because you have a 40-page document already. You have lots of resources. We've spent, each of us, over 2 decades exploring and learning and practicing regeneration. So there's far more than we can ever lecture you about in 2 hours. And so our best hope of providing something valuable to you is to share just enough that you can come with your questions, with your perspectives, and find your best angle, your best way in, your best way to understanding. So that's the hope. And the way that will flow is a bit more us in this first hour. We will plant some seeds and give a broad overview and a little bit of you. And this is a general exploration of regenerative approaches to tourism. And then in the second hour, it flips to mostly you and a little us. And we get very specific to your context so that you have something that you can act on as you leave. So just to give a little bit more detail to that, we will each, Bill and I, introduce ourselves a little bit more fully and share what we're bringing to the conversation. We'll invite some conversation about what you are noticing in the world, in tourism, in yourself, that brings you to this webinar. And we'll share very briefly what we're noticing too. And then we'll get into what's truly needed in response to those things that we are noticing in the world. Bill will start with an example, a story of what is possible when what is truly needed is present. And just to give some of the punchline up front, we believe what's truly needed is an expanded story, not only about the function and role of tourism, but an expanded story about life and organizations and community. And within that expanded story, then we can see a new role for ourselves and new practices of stewardship, of tending to the conditions for life to be able to thrive within enterprises and communities and beyond. What's needed then is bolder conversations, wiser conversations about things that really matter, that spur us, that inspire us to act with care for each other and for our place. And those call for greater courage and connection. We need each other. What did you say, Bill? We are all that we need? Was that part of
We are all we need.
We are all we need. But we need to be connected. So we'll close in the second hour with what it means for you to have an opportunity to explore that. And then we'll come back out to the big picture of those things that we noticed and how our view has shifted. Okay? So far, so good?
Onward.
Oh, all right. Bill, over to you.
Okay, just who I am. I'm an architect. I'm a recovering architect, actually, and don't really practice building design anymore. But my journey started with kind of the trajectory of ecological design, which we'll refer to a little bit, from conventional planning, which I realized and was very frustrated with, to passive solar design, to one of the founders of the LEED rating system in terms of what does it mean to actually not just work on energy, but buildings as a whole system. And then realizing that in order to work with a whole system, you have to integrate them in a much different way, not just gluing them together, but how do they complement and find synergies with each other? And that led to the question, where do we stop integrating? And that becomes a metaphysical question. And regeneration is not just about restoring nature, it's also regenerating ourselves. So that's the quick intro. Michelle, on to you.
All right. I have a trajectory to my career as well. I started out in marketing and brand strategy for some big multinational companies and found that it was exciting work, but also felt superficial and manipulative. And I thought there was something missing in this story we have about how we engage with customers and community. I moved into organizational development, leadership development, and organizational culture. It felt better, but I saw again a superficial and manipulative attitude towards employees and how we engage with them. My intuition and my research and reading told me that there was more to the story, that there is also life and living systems. And I work with a concept called thrivability, which is somewhat interchangeable with regeneration. That's been my focus for the past 25 years across a variety of sectors, including tourism and working with farmers in the transition to regenerative methods of agriculture, education, healthcare, all kinds of sectors. And along the way, in 2007, I brought in a practice called the art of hosting. And this has nothing to do with tourism technically. This is methods to host what is alive and what is the potential for any group. So these are helpful convening methods and a philosophy that's really aligned with living systems thinking. And as tourism moves towards regenerative principles, those two fields come together, and the art of hosting in my world and the art of hosting in your world start to come together in really beautiful ways. So that is a bit about me. And Bill and I did have a few opportunities to collaborate in the past. And so we were excited to have this opportunity, this invitation from Destination Canada, kind invitation from Emily and Billy, who are on this call, and others. And it was a joy to work with them. And also, we want to share some significant humility around this. This is an offering from two people of our perspective based on our experience and our stories. And we don't claim that it is perfect and the complete and total answer, but our hope is that this offering will spark conversation. And already you are here. So it's working. And even if you hate it, let's talk about it. So
Well, we got Billy and Emily here to back us up, so they have
all right.
They have some ownership to this too. So
yes, exactly. All right. So the next thing we'd like to do is that conversation about what are we noticing? What are you noticing in the world, in tourism, in yourself that brought you to this webinar? So we'd like to invite you into small groups for 5 minutes. Quick conversation, and then we'll come back and see what emerged.
Take a screenshot.
And I'll copy it into the chat as well, so you have it.
We got to do that right now, Michelle, or else they won't pick it up, I don't think.
No, I'll send it into the breakouts.
Okay, great. Here we go.
Yeah. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope it was a good conversation, even though always too short. So the general invitation is to make a few notes in the chat of what came up. What were some of the things you heard in your conversation that you were noticing in the world, in tourism, in yourself? Were there some things that surprised you that came up in the conversation that you hadn't gone in with? And I'd also love to hear from a few people. So helpful to hear things spoken. So if there's somebody who's got an urge to share what's in your heart, or what you enjoyed about your conversation, I invite you to speak up. You can either just speak up or raise your hand as a reaction, or whatever it takes.
Did anybody notice something they may not have noticed before in that reflection?
Go ahead, Gretchen.
Well, I'm coming to this conversation as a community engagement person, and from News Stories, Michelle, that's how you and I know each other. But I'm really impressed with the diversity of participants, just even that brief breakout room, people across the globe who are looking at these things from different angles, and really encouraged by today's meetup to learn more from people who are on the ground doing the work and might help us here up in the San Juans. Thanks.
Nice. Thank you for that. I may not be able to see you waving your hand. There are so many people, so just speak out if you want to.
Michelle, I said I wasn't going to talk, but I wonder if I could share just one little thing I shared with my group. And it was the fact that I was a difficult student when I first started working with you and Bill. And I thought that's like an interesting way, because although you believe in the concept and you understand some of these things, sometimes the journey is difficult. And Billy can attest to me being a difficult student, but it was such a great learning. So I just want to say out there, if people are struggling with some of the concept, or if you feel a little bit, am I sure about this? Like, just open yourself and then you really get it. And now I fully embrace it. But I mean, you can attest to the challenge that I was, right? In a good way.
She was really at that.
Yeah, but I just wanted to give that perspective.
Thank you.
It's okay if you don't get it all at once. It took me a minute. So
yeah, very helpful.
1 minute. That's all it took you, Emily.
well.
Hillary.
I'm fascinated by the roots of words, and for me, regenerative always means going back into the essence, going back into the original roots of something. And tourism comes from the word to turn a lathe, to turn on a lathe. So it isn't even about travel. It isn't even about, it isn't about all the things that only came in the 17th century. So I think there's an opportunity here to actually go back into the roots of what tourism actually meant, and to open it up in a very different way to explore possibilities and to break it wide open. I think, and that's what I love about regenerative work, is when you go back into the essence and then you bring it forward into a 21st century context, you actually get quite a different view.
Well, we're all tourists in our own lives too.
Exactly.
And then when we bring in hospitality, it gets really inspiring as well. Wonderful. All right. If you'd like to keep sharing in the chat what you noticed, that's welcome and invited. And I think I would share that Bill and I have noticed the world is kind of falling apart in a lot of ways. And there's a call for all of us to step forward in response to that. Now I want to find my screen again. Here we go. 1 second. I think I gotta set it up first. Bill, maybe you comment on this and then I'll come back.
Oh, okay. I'm
Oh,
not sure
hold
where
on.
you're going.
I'm back. I'm
All right.
back. Here we go. So this is a quote from the paper that we wrote, that in many ways, the situation is so dire, if we're really honest, that we need every sector to lay down their tools, turn to the world and say, these are our skills and resources. How can we help?
Right. Yeah, this work is not about changing who we are and what our essence. I love that Hillary brought that up. Our essence is it's to actually tap into that power of everyone's unique offering, unique skills, unique way of being.
Mm-hmm.
So, Michelle, with that in mind, should I tell a story?
I think you should tell a story of what it can look like when the tourism sector brings skills and resources.
How do I advance it? I think you have to advance for me.
That's right.
Okay. So hopefully this is a brief story. It's actually, there's lots of details involved, but a project we worked on in the mid-2000s, early 2005, 2006 is Playa Viva in Huachuca, Mexico, on the Pacific coast. And just the quick story about a regenerative aspiration. The client really didn't have that aspiration when we began. They just wanted to create a green resort, photovoltaic power and cleaning up the water and restoring the habitat. It's a great start. They're located on an abandoned palm plantation in Mexico. The village of Huachuca was a dying village. It was a 10,000 person Aztec tributary town, and now it's down to 500 people. Next, please. So when we arrived there, the first thing we discovered was this stepped pyramid you see there. That was an Aztec, it was covered with trees. It was an Aztec pyramid that no one remembered was there. And that was the hill that all the casitas were going to be built on. And that was a non-starter. We then, which was very depressing to the client, of course, but yet it offers an amazing opportunity as well. But really what happened, the revelation that happened was the client meeting with the elders of the village and experiencing how wise they were and the care that they had. And he basically fell in love with the villagers. And that was the penny that dropped. And realized, he said, we are not just going to tap into the village for, waiters and bartenders and maintenance people. We are the village. And that was the big conceptual shift that was made. It wasn't using the village, it was actually becoming part of the village. Next, Michelle. So the work began with the villagers themselves and actually finding out where their needs were and wants were. In fact, the president of Guerrero was going to give an exit off the highway for this resort. And David Leventhal said, nope, we're the village. We want everybody to come through the village and experience life as it is. Next, please. So because the pyramid was there, all the casitas David wanted to move the casitas down to the barrier island. And we at Regenesis said that is a non-starter. That's a way to destroy the barrier system and the estuary system. And one of the things that we had told David at the beginning is that nature harmonizes. It doesn't compromise. It doesn't concede. Because compromise is a slower way to die, if you will. You compromise and you compromise and you compromise again. And it's basically what we've done to the planet. We've compromised ourselves into a situation of death, really. So we said we had to recuse ourselves from the project. And David said, nope, you said you could harmonize. I expect this to be harmonized. And what happened is, so we had a 3-hour meeting. And what we came up with, next, Michelle. Next, please. We'll come back to that one. is the concept of a tree house that because the palm trees actually hold the dunes together. We found that there were palm trees growing on this dune. Can we plant palm trees? And sure enough, go back to the previous slide. We experimented. We found that they would take within about 30 days. We developed lashing techniques, courtesy of the Boy Scouts, and found out that we could actually create even a better environment for the guests because it lifted the casitas above the storm surges, held the dune together, and became even a greater amenity for the place. Next, Michelle. So you can see one of the tree houses right there. So that's an example of harmonization, but that's just a simple example of the resort itself. The real regenerative work, next please, happened with the villagers. The turtle poachers became the turtle wardens. Biodynamic farming was taught, organic farming was taught. And as David said, Playa Viva is not a hotel, it is a project. Next, please. Working with the community, developing soccer leagues, starting and populating schools and educating kids. The guests actually, support students going to high school, the transportation needed to get at once they leave the grammar school, the farm restoration and reforestation. But the best thing, next, Michelle, is that the best metric that I can imagine is the young adults are moving back and the teenagers are staying. So pretty good indicator. And the population is now increased by 40% in 15 years. And the place is being knit together with education, school systems, football leagues, and Playa Viva is a resource now for other groups in the area as a way of being. They provide permaculture teaching, education, construction, natural construction materials, and actually how one actually works regeneratively. And so that's the point of regeneration. It's not just about the resort; it expands like a pebble dropped in a pond. I don't know if I have another picture, Michelle. Nope, that's it. So the punchline is it's increasing life, not necessarily increasing stuff. And by the way, the profitability has gone. And it's an extremely profitable resort, and I can give you the data on that if you're interested. I had a debrief with David about a year ago. Okay, Michelle, back to you.
Anybody have a burning question or a comment about that story? Put it in the chat, or you can speak it out.
Better to speak it out because I'm not following the chat.
Yeah.
You need to do that.
All right, somebody put something in the chat. Can you see it?
A comment? Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh.
Anais, go ahead. Go ahead, Anais.
Yeah, sorry. I'm not about to unmute myself. Bill, I did the TRP, so I know the example and I love it. I was wondering how long does it take? Did it take you to go from what you observed to what's happening today?
Well, it was basically a 5-day research. We had a 5-day charrette workshop with the client. It was intense. It was traumatic. It was not what they thought they were going to be getting into. We had crying, screaming breakdowns. I mean, literally. And in fact, David had to actually ask his wife not to participate. So it was a tough scene, but in those 5 days of transformation, that's when everything was set. The pattern was set, if you will. And from there, it was just ongoing. David I'm really proud of him. He's been relentless in terms of pursuing the benefits of this and enrolling so many other participants in the area. So it's a great example.
And from that 5 days,
what's that?
It wasn't just the 5 days. It was
then.
Oh
no. 5 days for the transformation, and 15 years and into the future. It never stops. Regeneration is not a deliverable. Regeneration is a process. And that's another thing we need to say. So our projects actually emerge from this process. We don't start with a project, we start with a process of understanding life in that place, and then we understand what to build. Adam.
Thank you for sharing that story and explaining it as a process. And that made me think, if we teach this process like you're doing now, do you think stories like this can occur without foreign direct investment?
Without foreign direct investment?
Yeah. How was that project funded?
That was self-funded by David. It was a very bootstrap operation. It was not expensive. It doesn't take money to do this. In fact, I can tell you that this is true. Every project we work on, if the client is interested in working in a new way, has been less capital cost, less operating cost, and less and time to market is tremendous. We save an average of in hard to permit areas, we save an average of 18 months in land approvals. That's because the community is part of the decision-making process, right? So people who think that we're spending more money for better benefit, it's just the opposite. We spend less money for better benefit.
And I think, Adam, you're pointing to David was not from that area. And so
Yeah.
could this happen with people who are from that area as the
Well,
initial?
his wife is Mexican, and his other partner, Gerardo Caballas, is a biologist in Mexico City. So it wasn't as if the gringos were coming down. Yeah, David's a gringo, but it's a mix. Nonetheless, they were not native to that area. So the point is well taken.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think the answer is yes. You're asking, will we get to the point that local people can regenerate their local community? That's exactly the point. And there are projects present in this Zoom call that are doing exactly that. I'm looking at you, Celeste. I'm looking at you, Amelie. So yes, I want to point to Leslie Southwith Trask's comment in the chat that I really appreciate. And this is where we're going next, that what you have learned as a regenerative farmer is that the lens of the world as one of wondrous potential holds greater significance than one of the world falling apart. And that's this
Beautiful.
shift as well. Thank you for sharing that. So that is the shift that is needed if we are to get to that vision of regeneration in local communities. And so the starting point, as we see it, is to recognize the story that is dominant in the world now, and maybe most of you will be familiar with, but it's worth pointing to and recognizing that we are dominated by a story of falling apart and of organizations and communities as machines, economies as machines, in which the only purpose of activity is productivity and profitability, in which we are separate from each other and separate from nature. We exist to compete and consume. That the most rational and logical means of getting to productivity and profitability is to extract from a system selfishly. So this is the story that guides much of the world today. And it has shaped every aspect of our lives: learning, healthcare, agriculture, work, and in many ways, tourism as well. And I wonder if you would put in the chat some of the ways that you see this story showing up in tourism, in the visitor economy. And Bill, maybe you can read some of them out as they come in.
Sure.
It's not the only story.
I've got a few here. Tourism leakage, heads in beds, right? That's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Housing shortages. Well, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Are a result. Exactly.
Yeah, this is also an example of problem solving. You know, we try to boost an economy in one place and we destroy an economy in another.
Mm-hmm. So
over tourism, environmental degradation, biodiversity loss. Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we see tourism, that dominant story tells us that tourism is a conveyor belt. And the point is get as many people through a destination as possible, shake as much money loose from their pockets along the way as you can. It's efficiency. It's the generic is more efficient, so it causes all kinds of problems, even as it does good, and even as there is more to the story. The presence of that mechanistic story leads to problems in tourism and its impacts and elsewhere. Fortunately, that wondrous story, as Leslie put it, is rising to the surface of more and more people's awareness. We're starting to recognize that the world is not just a machine. Our organizations, our communities do not operate like machines. They are living ecosystems that can be tended with care and stewardship. And this is where that urge and awareness of regeneration comes from, in this shift that it's happening in every sector, in every part of society. And so in tourism, we see that as well, a shift from seeing it as a conveyor belt to seeing it as a complex and dynamic living ecosystem that includes the enterprise's community, the broader, more than human ecology as well. And Bill, you can speak to that
Sure,
transition.
a little bit of a pedantic perspective, but worth reviewing. So can you see my cursor? I guess you can't, can you? So we're on the left-hand side, this degenerating condition. We can look at the bottom line there, the conventional. We act business as usual is basically destructive in nature. And then we come along with green, the idea of green, LEED or Living Building Challenge, or any of the well rating systems, or the tour hospitality rating systems, are generally focused on washing your, not washing your towels every day and not changing your linen, and energy efficiency, and that's all important stuff. But what the funny thing about efficiency is it's only a certain way there. If we save 70 or 80% of the energy in our building, we're still dumping 30% of that into the atmosphere. So it's, as Bill McDonough says, sustainability is a slower way to die. And so we think that if we reach a sustainable condition, it must be zero, right? Net zero, zero bad, zero pollution, that kind of thing. But zero is impossible. There's always impact. So we need to actually shift our thinking to how do we restore life, and then how do we actually engage life so that it's in a thriving regenerative condition. Regeneration is often used, I'm going to be a little bit of a scold right now, regeneration is used predominantly now as a synonym for restoration. And that's fine, it does mean restoration, but it means much more than that. Restoration means that we are restoring a subsystem, like a wetland system or a riparian corridor, a beach dune system, so that it has the self-organizing capability to evolve. That's the really important term. It has the critical mass so that it actually is able to be on its own dynamic of increasing diversity and increasing diversity of relationships. That's what gives us dynamic stability, which is what we've lost on our planet. That's why all the hurricanes and storms and fires and floods are happening, because we've lost the dynamic stability of life supporting itself in an integrated way. So restoration is very important. It's not regeneration. Regeneration means that we are restoring again and again and again, meaning that life changes, life evolves, and we need to adapt to its evolution. And we need to regenerate our relationship with life. Let's take a year cycle. Every New Year's, we need to say, how are we doing? What did we do wrong? What might we adjust? How do we pay attention? And then we are in a regenerative mode. What it really takes is also for us to regenerate ourselves in order to be in relationship with each other so we can effectively work in the system. So as Katia Laszlo says, sustainability is an inside job. It starts here. It starts anywhere you want to start it because it's a whole system, but it takes us to change ourselves as well. It's just not out there. It's internal and it's external. All right, Michelle, anything you want to? Oh, yes, I do want to say a couple things. Another way to look at this is that the rest, so one other way is Carol Sanford talks about the 4 modern paradigms. So the conventional, we're extracting value, we're pulling ore from the earth or nutrients from the soil or spirit from our staff. We can do better. So we slow down the damage. That's where the rating systems come in and all the checklists that we do for sustainability. Then we get to the other side of the axis point, and we do good is a paradigm I think most of us are familiar with. And do good sounds pretty good, except when it isn't. And doing good can be like AID or the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund going into Africa or Central America and saying, we know how you should be living, just like us Northern Europeans and North Americans. We have it right. You have it wrong. And of course, it's a disaster. And so I could tell a lot of stories about that. So doing good, if you're lucky, is good, but it often is a form of colonialism, imposing an idea on someone else. So what's the antidote to that? The antidote is getting to essence, understanding the essence of every living entity, that every living entity has its unique potential, and that's understood by looking at what's core to every entity, whether it's a person, a family, an organization, a place, the place we live. So regeneration can be seen as developing an essence to essence relationship. I think I'll stop there, Michelle.
And I'll just add the way I think about what you've just been saying, that if we recognize an enterprise or a community as a living system, necessarily it is complex. It has diverse aspects and participating parts to it. And in that complexity, no one person, no one part has the whole view. So the more that you bring in the diversity of perspectives, the more likely you are to have a wise approach, to have a systemic approach. So to understand that essence and wholeness takes convening the system in conversation to integrate those multiple perspectives. And that's important to regenerative approaches to tourism.
Yeah, life doesn't happen without relationships. You know, people talk about diversity of species. Diversity of species doesn't work unless they're in relationship. So a zoo, for instance, has a diversity of species, but no relationship. Mm-hmm. So being in relationship is key to this.
Mm-hmm. So we have this term, regenerative tourism, that's become a buzz phrase. I see it everywhere now. And I see people talk about doing regenerative tourism. And in our understanding, it makes more sense to talk about becoming regenerative and becoming a regenerative host community. That it's impossible for the tourist to be the force of regeneration. This is often the first assumption, that it must have to do with the tourist's behavior. But what needs to be regenerated is people and place. And that's up to us in our communities to be connected, to sense the regeneration that is needed here. So most of all, this is about becoming a regenerative host community together over time. And so the language shifts from managing the tourist destination to cultivating the hosting community. And there are things that will always need to be managed, but not living things. Only the inanimate things are to be managed. Where there is life, there is cultivation, there is stewardship. So we might think of it as a collective practice of cultivating cohesion and connection. Cohesion in a shared understanding of who we are together. What is the potential of this place? And through our connection, then to develop the capacity to generate new possibilities and to regenerate, to continuously heal, and to generate creative acts of care within the community. So this is another way of thinking of this collective practice of stewardship. So Bill, do you want to say just a couple more words about wholeness and life?
No, probably more than you want me to say. But,
yeah, probably.
It's easy for us to fall into our automatic behavior mode. And the automatic behavior mode in our culture is reductionism. We want to do problem solving. How can you possibly work with a whole system? You have to reduce it. Actually, that's what causes us problems, is working with problems, because when you solve one problem, you end up with unintended consequences in other arenas. So how do we work with a whole living dynamic system? And a simple example, I hope, is that if just to maybe to help us remember this, is that, by the way, there's no such thing as sustainable paint or a sustainable light bulb or sustainable photovoltaic panels. Only life can sustain. Only life can regenerate. In fact, a sustainable condition is impossible without a regenerative relationship with life. So working on pieces and parts, while important, is insufficient. What we do need to be working on is the whole. So the way an analogy for this is, if I want to get to know Emily, for instance, which I do, I love working with Emily. But if I want to get to know her, well, I would, in the way that we do it in our culture, I would take her liver and kidneys and skeletal structure and DNA sequencing, and I would put them in a vessel, stir it up, but somehow I don't get Emily. The parts don't add up to the whole. So the only way for me to really get to know Emily is as a whole being. And the only way that works is by how I see her in relationship to her spouse and kids and colleagues, maybe her dog, the place she lives. Those relationships are invisible, by the way, but we add them up over time and we see certain patterns. And that's how I get to know a living entity, is through the patterns of their lives. It's the same thing with the places we live, too. I'll jump to that slide in a second. So, and once I actually see those patterns, that begins to explain and explore anyway, the essence of who Emily is at her heart, at her core. So the definition of a whole, just so you can hold this, is singular, and you can name it, her, it, the place, alive and evolving. And let's jump to the next one, Michelle. So what's powerful about this is that if we work with life on its own terms, life is always full of potential. Life never looks, if you can anthropomorphize nature, life doesn't look backwards and say, why did that hurricane coming through? I'm going to go to the bar and drown my sorrows in a number of beers. Life only looks forward to the future. If a hurricane comes through, then the pioneering species get to work, and the early succession species and mid-level succession species, and forges ahead, because it's always trying to create diversity and complexity. So if we actually, as people, can look forward as a whole system with our communities, we can actually, Russell Ackoff says, when you work with potential, problems dissolve. They dis-solve. They actually disappear when you're working with communities who actually take the time to function this way, to think this way. All right, I think that's enough on that, Michelle.
Okay.
Oh,
And maybe this is a good way to explain that a little bit further, and in the context of the Playa Viva project.
Yeah, good. So one way to characterize this, let's take Playa Viva here as this project on the left-hand side of the screen. The typical way we would work as an architect or developer is that we come in and we negotiate with stakeholders. We're going to build this resort. You may not be happy, but we'll give you access to our swimming pool. We're going to build this place, but we're going to give you a new school if you support our project. It's quid pro quo, it's transactional in nature. It's really not getting to the heart of the matter. It's compensating communities for what they perceive to be damaging. They accept it, you accept it, both, it's a lose-lose situation. The way life works, go to the right-hand side of the screen, that circle indicates the place, the community, the ecosystem, the watershed, the life shed, whatever you want to call it. It has potential. And by engaging those same stakeholders and looking forward, not solving their particular complaint, but saying, what do we want together? What is the home place we want to live in? And by the way, working with home is very open. It's an opening for people. Instead of politics, race, or religion, you're talking about what people care about. what's meaningful to them. And your home is a very safe territory to work within. And so all these stakeholders now are aimed at a common North Star. And we gather them together and work on how can we add our passion, our particular, where we're energized, our essence into serving this larger system. What's magical about this, it takes about a year of practice. By the way, this is a practice. This isn't a deliverable, like I said, but it takes about a year of practice before people start breaking out of their silos. Every community we work in around the world, that is the biggest consistent observation, is that people work in their own silos and don't communicate with each other. And this gives people an opportunity to say, wait a minute, I didn't know you were working on that. We're kind of working on the same thing, different angle. Maybe we should work together. And that's when this work gets powerful, because you're in a collaborative, co-creative relationship. Okay.
Fantastic. We are an hour in. So this is when we take a deep breath again, if you'd like, and stretch. And we want to check in. How are we doing? How's it landing? What questions? What confusion? You can put something in the chat or speak it out. And hi, Joanne. I didn't say hi to you, but happy to see you. What's coming up so far? Before we get into what it means for you. Oh, good. Alyssa, it all makes sense. That's encouraging.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. I'm not sure if you can hear me. I'm like working through my phone audio.
Yeah.
Hear you.
Okay. Hi, I'm Erin. I work with Tourism Nova Scotia in experience development. And it definitely makes sense what you're talking about, like having a larger whole. I know we've been moving some of our work to have a greater community focus over the last couple of years. But I guess my question, and maybe this will get talked about later, is when I had learned about sustainable tourism, the understanding was that it wasn't meant to be net zero. It was meant to have different elements that were to benefit the community, benefit the environment, so that it maybe it's not regenerative, but it was meant to be beneficial to a wider audience, not just that business. So when we would start to work with businesses on experience development, it was looking at showcasing local foods, and hopefully those local businesses would have more of an avenue to sell their goods. It would bring on stories that were traditional to that area, so you had a deep understanding of what that area had to, and what their traditions were like, what that area had to offer from a story perspective. In some cases, those traditions might not have been as vibrant currently, but it was able to bring them back to have more relevance to the community. So I felt like a lot of that work was meant to be a wider benefit, not meant to be just kind of a net zero benefit just for that business. And we have seen it work well in some cases. I know it's not perfect, but it was kind of seen as like a starting point to, tell the story, showcase the recipe, showcase this piece of a community, and then it would kind of snowball in some ways from there, or it would be a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Erin, I want to actually apologize, because the words don't matter. It sounds like you're working pretty regeneratively to me. So let's not get hung up with the words. So the word sustainability in my profession has been used and is continuing to be used as an efficiency measure, slowing down the damage. So that's where I'm coming at from this term. But let's call it Fred. Let's just make up a name. It doesn't matter. What matters is that this is that you are working together towards even greater diversity and resiliency in your system, and paying attention. Paying attention is key to this, and never, life doesn't stop when you hit a goal. It's a continual advancing. It's evolving. How do we actually? It's actually not being satisfied with status quo and saying we can keep doing more. and the more has to add value. Here's the key. The more we have to be adding value to all life. If there's any aspect of life that we are not adding value to, we are not regenerating life, we're destroying life. So that requires us to think in much broader terms in the typical sustainability checklist of, name the check: saving energy, reducing water pollution. I mean, all that's important, but adding value is what's really important. Okay,
and I would say if the sharing of recipes and highlighting local food happens within or emerges from a broader conversation about the multiple dimensions and essence of a place, then it has a greater chance of being regenerative, of being healing, because we find greater wisdom the more perspectives of the system we can bring into consideration. So there is some potential missed opportunity if the conversation isn't integrative at some level, and it doesn't have to be everyone all the time. There can be core stewards who are gathering to look at that system level and then share that inspiration into the more focused conversations about the recipe sharing and energy efficiency.
Yeah, and the other thing, point that Leslie raises is that we need to deeply understand the culture of place. Every place is different. It's not generic solutions too. So you're working towards the nature, supporting the inherent nature, inherent potential of that place. Yeah, I mean, I think we acknowledge that Ottawa is different than Vancouver. Is that fair to say? I think that's fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Why? What makes it different? And unless we, just like my children, they're all different. And if I don't treat them as individuals, I actually put them on a psychologist's couch, more than likely. So generic solutions are death, actually. So how do we pay attention? And what are those patterns of life? That's why I refer to those patterns of life.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I could go on for an hour on that subject. Nika, is it? Nika's raising her hand.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, yes, I'm raising my hand. Hello.
Hi.
So I'm also on my phone. I don't know if you can hear me.
Gotcha.
Perfect. So I'm coming from a very different context, not Canada, North America, Europe, Slovenia, a tiny country in the southeastern parts of Slovenia, of Europe. And I'm curious about mass tourism. So I come from an area that's where we have a tendency towards developing mass tourism destinations. And I would say in Canadian terms or American terms, it's still small, but it is quite impactful for our tiny communities. And I'm sensing a trend it's like a snowball effect. Once you get to a point where the prices of property starts rising and you get more and more investment in luxury hotels and luxury destinations, it increases and the community gradually dies. So I was curious if there are any examples where you addressed this type of tourism and what could be done, because it's a negative trend. So it's an increasing field. So you understand what I mean, I think.
Yeah.
So if there are any examples of this, or if you could just speak to that a little bit, I would really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. What comes to mind for me is Flanders. Visit Flanders, and Diana's here and might have some comments. But there's some beautiful work being done to question growth and to explore alternatives, and it's grounded in the community coming to understand who are we, what do we want as our quality of life, what do we value, and therefore what invitation would we extend. Diane, would you like to say one or two sentences, just very briefly? And somebody's typing very loudly.
Yeah, let's try to mute folks if we can, if we're not speaking. Thanks.
you point a question to me?
Would you say 2 words, two sentences
Yeah,
about?
I know that to start, I'm from Flanders, but I'm working with tourism organizations and in education in the Netherlands. So I'm not
Okay.
directly involved in
Ah,
the project in Flanders. I can
Ah.
only say that they really made a very daring shift to what you are talking about, and that it is really taking up in Flanders. But I don't know the details more than you know.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. And we can share some resources afterwards that are quite inspiring. But it's a community-based conversation that's happening in many communities around the world, as you know. And I think that's the only way. I also want to point to this word that you've used, snowballing negative effect. And I think the previous conversation was about snowballing positive effect. And I see in the comments in the chat, Shaylin is talking about a book that says we first have to reduce negative impacts, then create positive impacts, and ultimately we get to net positive. And Bill, I wonder if you have something to say about this kind of eventually we'll get some snowball effect of regeneration at the end of the line.
Yeah, I don't really believe that, but nonetheless, I'm hopeful that, we're all different and we all start at different points. And I'm very happy for people that are working what we call below the line. We need to be working on reducing impact all over the place. I don't think it gets us out of the paradigm of a mechanical worldview, though.
Mm-hmm.
I think somehow the jump is needed, the transformation is needed. But nonetheless, any port in the storm, we've all made that journey. This is where I've been doing this. I've been doing this limiting the damage work for 30 years or 30 years before this work. And at some point you look in the mirror and you say, am I doing enough? So potentially it is one way to go at it. But if you can jump ahead and realize that we have a role to play as human beings, as co-creators, we're going to be so much farther ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I want to just point to this one again. This is not a timeline. This is not that we must start here and progress through, and eventually we can get to the snowball effect of regeneration. This is a spectrum of strategies. And so why wouldn't you draw from a more complex, a more whole, more complete, and more effective strategy? Why wouldn't you start there, knowing that it also will allow you to address the problems? But the opposite is not true. When we start from fragmentation, we don't get to that outcome.
That's a good way of saying it.
Okay, last question, and then let's move on to the next thing. So Hilary, or comment.
It's more a comment than anything. And I think, we talk a lot about nature, partnering with nature, what nature wants, and we don't consult nature.
Right.
And we assume we know what nature wants. We use scientific barometers and tests and whatever else to actually identify what nature needs. But there is a way to connect with nature, and I actively involved what's called the listening field, where you go in and you actually connect with the nature elders, and they will tell you that in deep conversation what it is they're experiencing. We just did a whole series on the wildfires. We actually did a project with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, where we actually consulted with endangered species so they could tell us what it was, the story they wanted Canadians to know. This, we just keep, again, as we've done in other cultures, we make assumptions about what we think they need. We're doing the same thing with nature. And it's just there's so much richness and opportunity when we go to the source and we consult and we co-create. Nature wants to evolve too. It doesn't have all the wisdom in the world. It wants to play with us. It wants to evolve. It loves humans. So in regenerative work, there's an amazing opportunity to actually listen in, co-create with nature elders, with a range of different nature beings. And it sounds strange, but it actually is the most beautiful. And then you bring it into strategy and you start to look at how does that play with strategy. It's a phenomenal thing. And it really is the source.
Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you, Hilary. That's great.
And Celeste, I want to acknowledge your comment. I really appreciated that there's need for conversation everywhere about what does this mean to be a host, to host regeneration. And okay, let's see if we can find our way to applying this in your work, in your context. Bill, do you want to walk us through this very quickly?
Yeah, we thought through the lens of what does it mean in accessible terms. What's the process of working towards an evolutionary relationship? And so maybe it's too simple, but first understand and work at the scale of place. Anything larger than that is an abstraction. We can't do it. Anything smaller than that doesn't have effect. Place is this magic. It's not magic. It's just a critical point of life on the planet. And I like to say that we can save the planet place by place. We can't save the planet. It's too big. It's too abstract. Nobody's in charge. But we can work on our places. And this is what Eleanor Ostrom has proven. So,
and it's what David Leventhal did in your story. He didn't just say, I have this hotel, this resort, and I'm only focused there. He took inspiration from the place and the context.
Yep. Great. So then, as Hillary was saying, don't think about it. You do more than think about it. I'll consider an upgrade there, Hillary, is that, be with your place as a living system. And there's a number of ways to do that, but basically get rid of your thinking, in some respects. Actually begin to think about this place engage this place as a living entity, intuit and listen. There are ways of doing this, and this is where the patterning, you can think about patterns of life because those patterns actually don't lie. They keep recurring. That's how you begin to understand place. All right, cultivate a field of relationships. It's just not you doing it. You can't do it yourself. So the field of relationships is who is interested in being in service to this place, becoming a co-creative caregiver, if you will. And that happens through a group. You need to be engaging yourself and actually transforming yourself, and then that helps the field of relationships transform too, to work on the system. In our practice, we call it 3 lines of work: self, group, system. So those relationships lead to an understanding of what people's gifts are, and that not just people, life itself. Every living entity is a stakeholder. And inviting the gifts and the reciprocal, the mutually beneficial gifts and exchanges that happen between those people. But from a people perspective, everybody's got something unique to offer. Tap into that essence, tap into that energy. And that's where power comes from. It doesn't come from laws and restrictions and fear. It comes from love, basically. And then it's a process of stewardship or of co-creation, of actually practicing this work. Sustainability or regeneration or whatever we want to call it is the hardest thing we've faced as a species on this planet. We have to reverse engineer, if you will, reverse think a lot of bad practices. That doesn't happen overnight. Just like a language or exercise or meditation or dieting, it's a practice. It's not a change management weekend. So this requires a disciplined practice. And through that, we learn, we celebrate, we adapt, we deepen. That's the evolutionary part. So this is all sustainability or regeneration is about staying in the game of evolution. That's what it comes down to. So how do we practice evolution? All right, Michelle.
Okay, so here's where we'd like to turn it over to you to reflect on your own context. So I'm going to share a series of questions for you to think about alone. And someone is very eagerly trying to call me. So the first one is this practice of understanding and working at the scale of place. So first, I would invite you to think about what is your place and how big is here. And there can be multiple answers to that, depending on the situation that you're in. But what place for now calls most to you for care? And how big is it? I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I want to share a place where you can take some notes if you'd like. We have sort of a worksheet for your answers to these questions. You can just take notes on a piece of paper or in your own document, but this is a Google document with the questions that I'll be offering. And I will share my screen so that you can see what to do within that document. Where did it go? Well, you can see in there. Let's see, here it is. So if you go to the upper left menu bar and click on File and make a copy, you can name it whatever you like. And then the questions are available to you to take notes. So the first one, we'll just take a minute and think about and make a note of what is the place that you feel called to care for in this thought exercise. And how do you know?
How would you define it, right, Michelle?
Yeah. How do you know what the boundaries are? Where does it end? How big is here? And then we can ask, who is your place? If every place serves a purpose, has potential and unique genius, then you can't know all of it by yourself, but maybe you have some intuition, some sense, some experience of your place already, and you can start to make a note of what your story of that place, your experience and sense of your place is, and what makes it special. Maybe compared to another place, brings it more into focus. Or what is the visitor's story of this place? Why do people visit your place? What is the potential and genius that they see in it? What is the story that local indigenous people tell of this place? Or the geography, the water, the beaver or the bear or the salmon? Hillary, we saw you're coming. The geology even. And then we can reflect on what we see across them. So we'd like to give you 5 minutes on this question. Just see what comes up for as many of these as you can, and it will be incomplete, but what do you already sense and know about your place?
Read it lightly, just kind of hop through it. Grab your intuition. All right, we're giving 5 minutes right now, Michelle. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Take one more minute. All right. So it's necessarily incomplete. Did I lose Bill? Bill, are you still? There you are. Okay, good.
Still there.
Okay, good. Necessarily incomplete, maybe even frustrating, maybe exciting to discover perspectives you hadn't thought of that you might explore going forward. So what we'd like to do next is invite you again into a quick breakout to compare notes and see what inspiration you can take from each other's noticings and stories. So Bill, are you setting us up for that?
I am not, but I will in one
Okay, great.
second. All right, I'm going to recreate just for grins.
And then when you come back, as we did before, we'll invite some sharing in the chat and spoken out. So bring back some inspiration for the rest of us, please.
All right, everybody have a screenshot as necessary. And here we go.
Enjoy.
Sam, okay, I'm going to move then. Sam, are you there?
You could try to move him to 7.
Yeah, I'll move the, how about 8, just in case. All right.
All right. Welcome back again.
Well, that could have been a lot longer.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
I know. We could do it again. I think we should. And you can do it in your region. And now you have that worksheet. So what would you say if you kept going, Gretchen? What came up?
Well, similarities. I mean, Adam was giving us a really great overview of his territory in BC. And the islands have similar challenges, even though we're water and they're more landlocked. But I think, you know, the lack of engagement up here with Indigenous being at the table from the get-go is pretty dominant in how we're not even scratching the surface for having the right folks in the room.
Boy, I had this. I was on a number of projects in Vancouver, and it took 1.5 years to get the Musqueam people to even be admitted to the table. And then once they were, it blew the doors open. But no, we need the lawyers involved. We need the lawyers involved. That's the last thing you need involved. Sorry if any lawyers are on the phone on the Zoom call.
Yeah, and because the tourism plan that's being developed in San Juan County will be presented to the tribes, it won't be including them in the design of it.
Oh my goodness. Well.
What else? What else came up? And again, I'd love to hear, as Gretchen has shared, people speak out, but also I invite you to share in the chat.
I'd like to hear Isabella talk about a sentence that she said in our communication together that I thought was really, really fertile. Isabella, do you want
Way
to?
to put me on the spot, Celeste. I just said that for me, place lives in the connection and the conversation that we're making. So we were talking about how COVID separated us and didn't allow us to have those connections, and that isolation isn't where we can find regeneration. Regeneration has to be found in creating connection and creating conversations with each other, especially when we talk about, for my work, we are a Canadian travel agency. When we talk about building content or building trips for people to come and see place, the only way we can do that is by having conversations with the people who are on the ground. It's too big for us to know everything, every little valley, every little community, and what it means and how to connect. But we know that by connecting each other and by having those conversations, we can help be that bridge to build.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Isabella.
It is beautiful. And
Thank you, Celeste, for encouraging that.
Yeah, this is that lay down our tools, turn to the world and say, these are our skills and resources. How can we help? You are already bridge builders. You are already tapping into stories of place. How can that rise to the level of need in communities and in the world?
I, if I can come in here, I come from a very small island in the Indian Ocean, and I think that it doesn't really matter about the size. I think it's more, I'm just trying to get at the history of the place. It's not very old. It's only 200 to 300 years old, but you know, there have been a lot of settlers, the French, the English, the Arabic, Portuguese, but this is what is not, it's something that is not really brought out. And also, you know, the communities that are there, they all live in harmony. I mean, we have the Asian community, we have, you know, the French, we have the English, and we have so it's it's very unique. But sometimes we feel that, okay, we're going to be talking about the history, but the history is not always a very pleasant reminder. And I wonder how that, and I think that when we do include these you know, this history into a project, it actually you know, creates more of a balance between what had happened. And I don't know, I'm just thinking whether this can be actually maybe like a healing process for people that have been through slavery, or they have been through, you know, difficult times, that having them come in and you know, contribute can actually you know, help them and us. Yeah. So just
Does anybody have a response to Joya's comment?
I have no response for sure, but just a comment, and also see based on what I've seen around the world and working with the indigenous community as well. There are a lot of stories that are unpleasant. I agree. Also in Brazil, there are, you know, former slavers and all the story of the Afro-descendant. But I think that there is a lot of healing in telling those stories that haven't been told. And I say that also as a person that I go to the ground and listen to those stories, because the moment that the person, they start telling their own story, they start healing. And then you see that I see something shifting in them when they're telling me their story. And this, I think, is a power there in allowing stories that we might fear are painful, allow them to be brought anyway, because in the moment you do that, there is a moment, is a magical moment when actually you put it out, and it's like it's a cathartic process. I think that's what I witness, and I think is important we fear that we don't want to dig into pain, of course, but the fact that you're telling the story, you recognize that pain and you move forward. That is,
Yeah, I think that's
yeah.
Thank you, Alyssa. That's a response kind of to what Katie is asking in the chat. You do want to look forward, but you also have to release the past. And so thanks. Leslie.
I think the underlying word here is hosting. So in the context of hosting, the conversations that we host will start with the stories where people want to tell them. And if you host healing circles around a place, you will open up the gateway to that healing. So I really want, Lisa, yes, absolutely, that healing. And then as you start to expand out in terms of your hosting circles, you start to bring in the kind of place-based community that allows you to sort of really bring in another energy. So each hosting is a different energetic. It's hosted with a different intention. And so when we talk about hosting regeneration, they are both very powerful disciplines in their own right. And then when you bring them together, wow, here you go. And one other thought, the reason I put my hand up was that I think of regeneration as systems. So I think not in terms of place, although it was very easy when I was 10 years on the Camino, I could tell you place right away. But now I live in regenerative systems. And so who are the people that are in deep transformation, that are systemically connected? And that's why our earlier comment about connection is so powerful. What systems are we a part of that are regenerating? And how does that inform our place of space? And my only last comment is the place that I feel the who is are where my three grandchildren are. And so that would be Alberta and Nova Scotia. Those are the places I care deeply about because of my maternal responsibility to carry on.
Yeah, just to underline, thank you, Leslie, to underline that a little bit. Place from an architect and a planner standpoint makes a lot of sense. There's also the same, we have a term in our practice called a field of endeavor. That's the system that you're talking about. What are we endeavoring? So corporations have fields of endeavor. They don't really have a place. So I just want to underline your point. Thank you for making that.
Leslie, I loved what you shared, and I'll have to go back to the recording. I didn't catch all of it, but there was some wonderful wisdom in what you've shared. Thank you. Last comment from Celeste, and then we've got a closing reflection.
I guess I want to just pick up on what Leslie said. I've been really thinking about what is my definition of tourism today. And this is what I say to myself and to others who are willing to listen. Tourism is not an industry. It's a relationship. It's a relationship between hosts, host communities, host businesses who are inviting travelers to come. But in the invitation, we're asking them to be responsible, something we haven't done a lot of in the past. So we have to inform them about what being responsible in our place means. And we take them into our places and activities and stories. As we share, our hope is that it will affect them. And that's why regeneration becomes so critical, because if they can be involved, observe, and be part of that regenerative practice, then they take that back to their communities. And so to me, that's the broader sort of understanding I'm coming to in terms of what tourism means to me and those I work with. Thanks.
Thank you, Celeste. I want to underline that by a real example. Speaking about Playa Viva, I live in Arlington, Mass, just outside of Boston, and this woman comes up to me, who I know somewhat. She said, "Bill, I want to tell you about this experience I had at Playa Viva. I didn't know you were involved in that project, and I invested $250 in a business there, and I'm so excited to go back. And this is just a great relationship building process." Anyway, so just underlining, Celeste, what you're saying.
And what I'm hearing in what you're sharing, Celeste, is that it's a process and a practice of ever greater wholeness. We become more whole in ourselves, embedded in our place, and therefore it is a practice of healing ourselves and our place, and we're inviting others into that particular form of healing. I find that regeneration can be a synonym for healing. Our bodies regenerate, they continuously heal themselves. And so back to words, I think it was Hillary who brought us to that. Hospitality and hospital and hospicing and healing, it's all from the same root. So it's a natural transition. I'm going to leave you with these questions to reflect on your own time. You have the questions, you have the worksheet. We'll send you the link if you missed it as a follow-up, but you have allies. There are others in your community who also care. And if you don't know who they are, maybe you find the courage to put out an invitation, because what I find is that many people are waiting for someone to have the courage to step up and speak about care and love and healing. We all think these are words that we're not allowed to say in the context of business. And yet when someone does, the energy rushes in. So think about who they are. And these are some of the domains in which they may be expressing their care. So give some thought to that, and who you might like to reach out to after this webinar to continue the conversation, and reflect on your own gifts and contribution. What is your passion? Where do you have the most energy? I was talking with my mother about this morning, and I said, it's kind of the what keeps irritating you that you think somebody ought to do something about that, and maybe it should be you. And she said, or wouldn't it be wonderful if? So that was a nice reframe. And then there's that invitation into the work over time, over a year or more, doing the work together as a community of learning and practice grounded in place and care and love and healing. And it comes down to meetings, having meetings regularly as a group that has come together and care for this place. And how you meet matters. Those meetings have to be both a practice ground for thriving, and you have to get stuff done. Otherwise, the energy fizzles. So, Celeste, I'm reminded of our conversation about impact, and it's necessary to keep going. So this is part of the practice. Where I would like, Bill, before I go to the final reflection, do you want to add something here?
Yeah, just a few words about the practice. Consistency, periodicity, meaning you're having it every a certain duration. So duration, consistency, and effect. That they don't have to be big effects, but if people don't have effect, they lose interest. So the practice becomes abstract. And that's kind of the magic recipe that we use.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you might remember, you might have seen the invitation to this webinar started out with 5 really big, weighty, meaty questions. And I want to come back to them and come back to our original noticings about what's happening in the world. What are we noticing in the world? What are we noticing in tourism? What are we noticing in ourselves? What seems to be truly needed. So I want to bring us, we've come down to the very personal and practical. And now I want to scale back out to where we started to go with the healing power of the hospitality sector and of all of you. So I'd like to just remind us one at a time, put them on the screen here, these 4 questions that formed our invitation to you, to this conversation, and invite you to reflect on how you see these questions, how you experience them differently now at the end of this conversation. And I'll invite you to share in the chat and a little bit of spoken comment as well. So what is the role? What role is the hospitality sector called to play? What role is the hospitality sector called to play in the face of the environmental, social, and economic crises of our times? What's changed in how you think about that? What unique contributions can Canadian and Indigenous hosts, or hosts in your place, if you're not in this land, what unique contributions can you and they make in regenerating communities, ecosystems, and livelihoods? What are the conversations we need to have if we are to respond to what is truly needed? And if we are to reimagine what is truly possible? And what is the regeneration that can only be hosted here, in your place? What is the unique form of healing that can only happen there, and therefore might be considered your responsibility to the world to create that space of find in yourself as you think through these questions. You can put some thoughts in the chat. You can speak out. And Bill, I can't see the chat, so if you see something, could you comment on it? But I can't hear you, Bill.
Become the host. This is from Gretchen. Lead from this perspective. Adam says, as the host, make it easy for the traveler to be part of the system. Emily, they're coming in so fast, I'm jumping. Nurturing relationships. Leslie, to welcome all living beings to be whole. That's powerful. Be willing, Shailin, be willing to unlearn and be courageous and ambitious in the actions you take. Leslie, role, to reflect the unique essence of place and uncover the deeply felt invitation that this place wishes to offer to others. Very much kind of what Hillary was saying. Joya, what is the end goal? Objective first. Yeah, you got to know where you're headed.
Yeah. Is there somebody who feels an urge to share spoken thoughts, comments?
I'll share what Gretchen says and then stop. Be the host convener for Indigenous and others to be in conversation that leads to regenerative options.
Nice. Hillary.
You're muted, Hillary.
I'm moved by two things here. I'm moved by that I believe that we're trying to tap into the future that's already here. And it's emergent. And it's also with that is the grief that comes with letting go of what has been and opening to the power of what's trying to come through. And I think that in regenerative work, hosting that kind of interchange of the hospicing of the old, but also acknowledging the future is here. It's not something we create out there. It's already here. We just need different lenses to be able to see it and to experience it and to feel it.
Beautiful. And we need each other to be with that grief also.
Yes.
We need each other to discover the future and to be with that grief. We can't do that alone. Beautiful. And who is more qualified than a whole community of hosts? There are some new skills that are needed, but you're very well positioned. And some new support.
Yeah, I was just thinking about actually what is what I meant by what is the end goal, the objective, what when we do bring people together, when we bring everyone, slowly coming and collaborating and cooperating together, at the end, what is successful to the program? What is successful to the project? I mean, is it that everybody's collaborating and that's it? Is it that I guess it would be many things, yeah. Is it that the environment we feel is being regenerated, the people are being revived, etc. So okay.
Let me try something on that, Joya. So we have a tendency in our culture to compress everything and, what's the answer? And there's a difference between the North Star, the potential that we're headed towards, and there's interim steps to get there. It doesn't happen overnight. And I think what's important, what I've seen, I'll just speak from my experience, what's important is to map out with the community these potential, because they always change, by the way, it's continually regenerated, but to be paying attention to these, what we call interim end states, these interim states that actually become the goals on the way to this larger potential that we can see in the future. And the only map is that we are aware that there are steps to get there and that we're working towards it, and then we're adjusting, continually adjusting. But helping people become conscious that there is a process that we can actually not adhere to, but pay attention to and adjust, actually allows people to feel much more secure and directional than just saying, let's be nice to each other. And then, of course, let's be nice to each other while we're doing that. That's more than nice. How do we care for each other? How do we add value to the system?
Mm-hmm. We've got 3 minutes to go. This is the end of our time together. Maybe another deep breath. There's been a lot of intense and powerful reflections and concentration. And so one last invitation to share in the chat, and anybody is invited to speak out as well. But what are you leaving with? Can you share in a phrase? What are you leaving with? Bill, are you signaling?
No, I'm taking a look. I'm not sure if these are generic comments or.
Yeah. And Lisa, thank you and goodbye. Thanks for sharing your gratitude.
Oh,
and I share my gratitude as well. Yeah. Hope is what we were going for. Pardon?
Michelle, you want me to read a couple of these?
Sure.
Yeah. From Adam, I went into this workshop thinking about the traveler segment that would be the least on board. After the conversations, I think I have found a reframing for how hosts can change the conversation to get them aligned.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Leslie says, what is regeneration? Canada and its communities hold rich diversity with inclusionary values, and we are willing to undertake the deep journeying required to become connected to our place, its roots, and its passageway through the polycrisis we are all part of. Billy says, opportunity and challenging for those working in and invested in the hosting economy to recognize and grasp our larger potential. That is, apply the regenerative paradigm to go beyond short-term monetary gain or customer satisfaction. Difficult, but we can inspire.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think as we go into the last minute, we can let people finish their comments, their sharings, and big gratitude. Thank you all. 2 hours is online is a big commitment and a big endurance. So thank you. I think this was beautiful. We'll share the recording. We'll share the notes. We'll keep in touch. I think this is a conversation to continue.
Thank you all.
Mm-hmm. And please unmute if you'd like, and
thanks, folks.
Share a goodbye.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Beautiful hosting, Michelle and Bill. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.